This lesson, we're jumping right into coding, but before we do, just a little overview on what JavaScript objects are. And if you do understand JavaScript objects, well, this is the key to understanding JavaScript, because almost everything in JavaScript is an object. So when it comes to writing code, there's always more than one way to create a solution, and we're going to look at that in more detail as we progress through the lessons when we create certain code, and then we're going to make it within an object-oriented programming format later on in the course. So the object is a collection of properties. A property is associated between a name and a value, and it's basically a way to get information and store information. So think of it as a more complex variable where you've got access to tons of information, and objects can be very, very large. So a property can also contain, so the object can also contain a function, and then within the object, this function functions the same way as a function, but it's known as a method. So that's the two key things to keep in mind about objects is that they're very versatile and they can get very complex, so they can hold information as well as methods. In order to create an object, there's a number of ways to create objects. So typically you might be familiar with the literal notation, where just as we would with a variable, where we create a variable and then we've got the curly brackets, and then we've got a name and a value, a name and a value, and then we can return that information back from the object. So how about we try this out, and we're going to create some simple objects in this lesson. So you can open up your editor, and you can create your person object as well as create just a regular object. So create a variable or a value and then associate some names with values within it and then return that information back using your console, and then make it a little bit more complex where you could use your first name, your last name, assign an ID, and then include a method, and then use some of the data that's contained within that object and then return that back when we call back the method. So in this example, we've got person.details, and it's returning back the information contained within the object. So go ahead, pause the video, try this out, and I'll walk you through these two solutions coming up. So now let's have some fun with JavaScript. Open up your editor, and I'm going to hide the rest of the sidebar because we're only going to be working on the apps area. And this is the crucial part of what we're looking at within this lesson, of course. What we saw earlier is how to create a basic object. So you can give it a name. I'm going to call it my object, so we're short. And then anything within the object is contained within the curly brackets. So if we want to add content into the object, we can have whatever we want. So give it a name and then a value associated with it. So we can have hello world or whatever string, number, array, object, as well as function associated with this named value. So if we have something like greet, and again, we could create another string, we could have a number, we could also have an array within the object. So this is all simple data types, and then this array can contain different values as complex as you want within the object. We can have an object within an object. So this is all indicated the same way, and then this object would be, again, broken down. So let's refresh and look at how the object looks within the browser. So we've got all of that great stuff contained within the object. And as you can see, there's a ton of information, and we can go really deep when we are creating these objects. As well, if we wanted to return the information or if we wanted to add to this object, it's relatively easy to do, where we just reference that main object, and then we can use the dot notation to add content to it. So if I want to have add, I could say hi, add it. So there's a number of different ways to update and to add. So you can use the dot notation or you can use the bracket notation. So all of this is going to be the same. And within the bracket notation, it's a square brackets, so it looks a little bit like an array. And then here's where you've got the name that's associated with it. And then the value is on the right-hand side. So now if I list out my object, you're going to see that all of this information that I've just added has now been added in. So there's the add, which says hi. We've got the test1, which has a value of 2. And then you can update these as well. So my object, dot, and so if we wanted to change add, we can change it to a number if we wanted to, and then we can list out the object again, and you can see that it's changed, so it's been updated within the object. So those are the primary ways to create an object and then add content into the object. And we also saw one more example where we've got another object, and this one was a person, and it actually returned back some details. So let's create that one as well. And you can use var, and you can also use const as well. So depending on the scope that you want to create, because the way that objects work when JavaScript, they reference an instance. So even though it's const, we still have the ability to update the values that are contained within there, because we're not actually updating the object itself. So we're not updating the object. So if we were reassigning this object to something entirely different, like a string or something like that, then we would throw an error. But in this case, we're still able to make the updates because it's referencing a part that's referenced within the memory. So we are able to use const in order to declare the object. So even if I was to take my object, and if I do something like this, my object equals test, I'm going to throw an error because we're using a const. But everything else, if we're working within the names and the values that are contained within the object, we're still okay and we're good to go. So let's do that last one where we're including the method. So creating a person, and you can use your own name as well. So we've got first, and for my case, it's Lawrence, and then a last name. And you can throw in a number there if you want as well. And this is the most important one. We're going to be attaching, so we've got the name, and the value on the right-hand side is going to be a function. And this function is going to be returning back some content. So using return, and we're going to use a template literal. So we're using the backticks. That's just above the tab to the left of the 1 on your keyboard or on most keyboards. And this gives us the ability to add in variables. So we can reference the content of the object using this. And because this one has a last name, so we do last name. And then here we can write the rest of the string that we want to output. So again, we want to maybe reference the first name here, $sign in the brackets, and then the ID. So this is just regular string content here. Then referencing the object, we're going to add the ID. So lastly, so let's see what happens. So now we've got another one that we've created called person. If we want to get the first name or the last name, we can just do first. It returns back first name, person last, returns back last name. So we can get that information. And if we want to get person and details, so this is a function. So we want to invoke the function, use the rounded brackets to invoke the function. And you can see that it returns back that template literal, that string there, we just constructed using the content that's contained within the object. So go ahead, try this out. And we've got some more really cool things with JavaScript coming up.